Every morning carries a hidden battle, but some dawns are darker than others. When affliction whispers defeat before the day even begins, most collapse under weight, but one believer refuses to bow. This story unveils the unseen war fought in the first light of day, spiritual attacks, emotional storms, invisible pressures, and the silent suffering no one sees. Yet with every rising sun, strength grows, authority awakens, and a warrior emerges from the shadows. From trembling prayers to heaven-backed victories, this journey proves one truth. When affliction tries to weaken you, God is already preparing to raise you higher. Your mourning may break you, but it can also make you unstoppable. As dawn broke over the city this morning, a quiet heaviness seemed to cling to the air, an invisible pressure that many residents say mirrors the weight they feel within themselves. While the streets slowly filled with early commuters and shopkeepers preparing for the day, countless individuals reported waking with an unexplainable sense of emotional burden, as though the battles of yesterday had crept into the new sunrise. Experts describe this phenomenon as a spiritual heaviness, a state where the mind awakens before the heart is ready. According to several community members interviewed before sunrise, the internal struggle often begins long before any physical activity. Some described waking with racing thoughts, lingering anxieties, and a familiar sense of dread that seems to arrive even before their feet touch the floor. "It feels like a fight you can't see," one resident said. "Like something is trying to drain your strength before you even start your day." Reports suggest these emotional battles have become increasingly common among individuals facing ongoing life pressures. Mental health observers point out that this weight is not always tied to external circumstances. While financial stress, family conflict, and uncertainty often play a major role, many say the heaviness appears without warning, even during otherwise stable seasons of life. They believe this points to a deeper spiritual dimension that remains largely overlooked. There are storms people navigate silently, one counselor noted. These storms don't show up on weather radars, but they hit with the same force. Early morning prayer groups across the region confirm a rise in individuals seeking strength before heading into their day. Leaders of these gatherings report that many attendees arrive emotionally exhausted but unwilling to surrender to the invisible battles pressing against them. "People are fighting wars no one can see," one prayer leader shared. And sunrise is often the moment those battles feel the strongest. Observers suggest that this recurring weight is not merely emotional but also spiritual in nature. They describe it as a subtle attack, one that attempts to weaken resolve and dampen faith at the very beginning of the day. Specialists say such unseen pressures aim to distort perspective, making ordinary challenges feel overwhelming before they even occur. "It's as though something pushes against your spirit before you have a chance to stand," another expert said. Despite these early morning struggles, many individuals insist that the fight is not hopeless. As reports continue to surface, community leaders emphasize the importance of acknowledging the battles faced at sunrise. "Recognizing that these pressures exist is the first step," one leader stated. "Because once you identify the enemy, you can confront it with strength, prayer, and purpose, even before the world fully wakes up." In a continuing investigation into the quiet battles greeting residents at sunrise, new reports this morning reveal a deeper, more targeted pattern behind the emotional heaviness many have been facing. Authorities in spiritual wellness circles now say the weight described in yesterday's early accounts may not be random at all, but rather part of a calculated assault that seeks to weaken individuals before their day has even begun. Evidence from multiple testimonies suggests that what many believe to be ordinary stress might actually be signs of a coordinated spiritual attack. Witnesses from various neighborhoods describe similar experiences: sudden waves of discouragement upon opening their eyes, inexplicable fears settling in the chest, and intrusive thoughts that attempt to undermine confidence. These symptoms, experts claim, reflect more than emotional fatigue. They reflect the fingerprint of affliction itself. "The enemy comes early," said a local spiritual counselor. "He strikes at dawn because that's when the heart is least offended." Residents speaking anonymously reported that the attacks often arrive quietly, masquerading as normal morning worries. A mother in East District said she woke with the thought that she would fail her children today, despite no evidence suggesting she would. A businessman shared that he felt a crushing conviction that everything he built was destined to collapse. Specialists analyzing these accounts argue that such thoughts are not natural. They are strategic whispers meant to sabotage the spirit before action can begin. In several prayer groups, leaders confirmed an alarming rise in what they call preemptive strikes, spiritual assault designed to drain strength before a person faces the challenges of the day. These attacks are subtle, one leader reported during an early gathering. They come disguised as logic, worry, or imagination, but the moment you listen to them, you feel your courage slipping away. Analysts suggest that these dawn-hour blows are part of a larger pattern, weakening identity, silencing hope, and blurring perspective. When asked why such attacks are most common in the morning, spiritual observers explain that dawn represents new beginnings, a moment of potential that dark forces aim to extinguish before it can take form. The start of a day is the start of opportunity, an expert stated. If the enemy can break you early, he can break the entire day. Additional investigations reveal that many individuals experience physical symptoms alongside their emotional battles. Reports include sudden exhaustion upon waking, heaviness in the chest, tension that appears immediately after opening the eyes, and confusion that clouds decision-making. Physicians acknowledge that while stress can cause these reactions, the uniform timing and sudden onset across various groups indicate a deeper source. This growing pattern has pushed community leaders to raise the alarm more urgently. They warn that ignoring these morning attacks could lead to spirals of discouragement throughout the day. When a person believes the first lie whispered into their spirit, they begin their day already defeated, one leader said. And that defeat grows quietly, unnoticed, until it feels like truth. However, not all news is grim. A surprising development emerged from several households reporting that once they recognized these early attacks for what they truly were, the heaviness began to lose its grip. One resident described a moment when she deliberately challenged a negative thought at sunrise, only to feel the pressure instantly weaken. It was like exposing a shadow to light, she said. Once I saw what it was, it couldn't control me anymore. Experts in spiritual resilience confirm that awareness is the first defense. Recognizing that affliction has intention, recognizing that the attack has a face, allows individuals to respond instead of collapse. The greatest advantage affliction has is invisibility, an analyst commented. The moment you identify it, the battle shifts. As dawn settles across the city once again, officials urge residents to stay alert. The invisible hand of affliction may attempt to strike early, but awareness turns victims into warriors. And according to local leaders, this rising awareness signals that the city is no longer waking up unprepared. A new kind of dawn is coming, one where silent battles are met with open eyes, steady hearts, and the strength to push back before the day can be stolen. As new evidence surfaces from residents battling unseen morning pressures, a dramatic shift in the narrative has begun to emerge across the city. After days of reporting on the silent, targeted attacks that strike at dawn, officials now confirm a powerful counterresponse rising among the affected, a collective cry, raw, trembling, and desperate, that appears to shatter the grip of early morning affliction. Witnesses describe this cry not as panic, but as prayer, an urgent call that seems to ignite hope where heaviness once reigned. Multiple households have reported the same sequence. The moment they recognize the invisible assault pressing against their minds, something within them refused to surrender. One resident described waking with a suffocating sense of failure, but instead of collapsing under the weight, she whispered a broken plea for strength. It wasn't even loud, she said, just a sentence, a breath. But the moment I said it, the atmosphere changed. Analysts confirm this phenomenon is spreading rapidly. In the early hours before sunrise, several prayer groups documented what they called breakthrough moments, occasions when individuals, once overwhelmed by discouragement, suddenly found themselves speaking words of faith with a force they did not expect. You could feel it, a group leader reported. 1 minute the room felt heavy. The next, something lifted like a storm blown apart by wind. Spiritual observers claim such moments mark the moment when affliction loses its strongest weapon, silence. Counselors reviewing these reports agree that the cry emerging from residents is more than emotional expression. It is spiritual defiance. They say this cry functions like an alarm, alerting heaven to the distress below. People think prayer needs to be perfect, one expert explained. But what we're seeing is different. We're seeing desperate honesty. and desperate honesty seems to shake the darkness in ways prepared words never do. Several witnesses recalled intense emotional release during their morning cries for strength. Some reported sudden tears, others a feeling of warmth, and a few described what felt like a physical weight lifting from their shoulders. Medical professionals acknowledge that emotional release can cause such sensations, but many insist the timing and impact suggests something far beyond psychological explanation. This isn't typical, one doctor noted. The speed of relief is extraordinary. Not all cries were dramatic or loud. In fact, most testimonies describe the opposite. Quiet words spoken between shaking breaths, whispered prayer uttered under blankets, or a single plea for help voiced while sitting on the edge of the bed. Yet despite their softness, these cries appear to pierce through the very heaviness that sought to silence them. It's almost as if the darkness knew it had been exposed, one resident said. Across multiple districts, reports show that even the atmosphere of homes began to change following these early morning cries. Individuals spoke of feeling a sudden peace, a strange clarity, or a renewed determination that did not come from themselves. Some said the room felt lighter. Others said they felt as if someone stepped into the room with them. "I can't explain it," a father admitted, "but I wasn't alone anymore." Local spiritual leaders state that the shift residents are experiencing confirms something long understood, but rarely acknowledged publicly. Affliction may strike first, but heaven responds faster. They say that once a cry goes up, it disrupts the enemy's strategy, breaks mental patterns, and pushes back the darkness attempting to seep into the day. The moment a person calls out, one leader said, the battle flips. Officials monitoring these spiritual developments warn that this does not mean the attacks will stop immediately. However, they emphasize that the dawn-hour battles are no longer one-sided. Residents are no longer waking up defenseless. They now know that even a whisper can summon strength greater than the forces pressing against them. And in the words of one community elder, a cry to heaven always travels faster than an attack from the enemy. As the city continues to wake under a shifting spiritual atmosphere, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The cry that rises from brokenness is becoming the sound that breaks the darkness. And for the first time in many days, residents report stepping into their morning not as victims of affliction, but as people who have been heard, people whose cry has pierced the heavens and shaken the silence that once held them captive. In the latest development following the widespread reports of early morning cries breaking through spiritual heaviness, residents across multiple districts are now reporting an unexpected surge of strength, described by many as a holy fire, igniting within them shortly after their cries reach heaven. What began as quiet, trembling pleas in darkened rooms has reportedly transformed into a force so tangible that individuals claim their fear, confusion, and discouragement are being burned away before their day even begins. Authorities monitoring the phenomenon say this holy fire is not merely emotional resilience returning after distress, but a supernatural empowerment that residents themselves admit they cannot explain. One witness described it as a warmth rising from inside, like courage returning in waves. Another said, "I felt like I could finally breathe again, not because my problems vanished, but because something stronger woke up in me." Experts confirm that these testimonies are consistent with dozens of overnight reports. Prayer leaders who documented the earlier cries now say they are witnessing what they call spiritual ignition moments, instances where individuals suddenly shift from trembling weakness to steady boldness. "You can see it happen," one leader explained. Their shoulders straighten, their eyes sharpen, their voice steadies. It's like watching someone stand up on the inside. He insists these moments cannot be attributed to adrenaline, noting that many occur in the stillness of early dawn, long before any physical exertion. Several residents who felt overwhelmed just days ago now report a new sense of clarity and mental strength. A woman who previously described waking with paralyzing anxiety said she suddenly felt her thoughts reorder themselves after releasing a desperate cry hours earlier. "Everything that felt tangled in my mind straightened," she said. "It felt like a fire burning away all the lies." Psychologists reviewing such testimonies acknowledge that clarity can follow emotional expression, but they admit the speed and intensity described here are far beyond typical patterns. Even in homes where heaviness had lingered for weeks, shifts in atmosphere have been reported. Families claim their living spaces feel noticeably lighter, as though an unseen weight has been lifted from the air itself. Some described waking to a sense of calm, so profound that it startled them. It was like waking up in a different house. One father of 3 said, "The oppression that used to greet me at sunrise wasn't there. Instead, it felt like peace walked in before I opened my eyes." Spiritual analysts observing the events unfolding suggest the rising strength is a direct response to the cries described in Chapter 3. They argue that once heaven responds, its presence brings power, not just relief. People expected a cry to lighten the burden. One analyst said, what they didn't expect was the cry to ignite strength. Affliction comes to weaken the spirit, but God's response doesn't just restore, it equips. Some residents reported experiencing what they called moments of holy confidence, brief but overwhelming surges of assurance that everything oppressing would eventually fall away. These moments often occur suddenly, while brushing teeth, preparing coffee, or simply standing by a window watching the first light break across the sky. It felt like someone whispered, "You're stronger than what's fighting you," one man shared. And I believed it. Officials monitoring community well-being have noted a remarkable shift in public behavior. Individuals who previously moved slowly and cautiously through their morning routines now begin their day with renewed determination. Productivity reports from several workplaces show noticeable improvements, with employees citing a better morning battle as a reason. Supervisors say that even those who typically arrive drained now appear energized and focused. Yet perhaps the most dramatic shift is this. Residents no longer describe themselves as victims of morning affliction. Instead, they speak of themselves as warriors, people who have discovered strength in the very moments meant to break them. It's not just relief, a local teacher said. It's empowerment. Something in us is waking up, something fierce, something holy. As dawn rises across the city once more, observers note that a fire, small at first, now growing, is sweeping through the hearts of those who cried out in their darkest hour. And with this fire comes a message spreading quietly but powerfully through the community. If affliction strikes early, then so does God's strength. And when strength rises like holy fire, the day cannot steal what heaven has already restored. A dramatic escalation has unfolded across the city following the recent surge of holy fire reported in households battling early morning affliction. Overnight investigations now confirm what many residents had only dared to hope. The strength rising within them was not merely an internal awakening. It was evidence of divine presence stepping directly into their morning battles. Reports from multiple districts indicate that individuals who cried out in weakness and later felt a surge of holy boldness are now experiencing unmistakable signs that God himself has entered their dawn. Witnesses speak of moments that defy natural explanation. Some describe waking abruptly with an overwhelming sense of peace, as though someone had gently laid a hand on their heart during the night. Others say they felt as if the room itself was filled with a presence, warm, calming, authoritative. "I didn't see anything," one mother said, "but I knew I wasn't alone. It felt like someone stronger than the darkness stood beside me." Experts reviewing such testimonies call these encounters spiritual interventions, noting that the consistency across different homes is difficult to dismiss. In one district, prayer leaders held an emergency dawn meeting after dozens of participants reported identical experiences. A sudden quietness within their thoughts, a lifting of burdens, and a sense of being enveloped in an unexplainable stillness. It was as if God walked into the room, a participant said, visibly shaken, not in a dramatic flash, but in a presence that changed everything. Leaders say such testimonies indicate a shift from internal resilience to external divine involvement. These divine encounters are not limited to emotional shifts. Several residents claim they woke with solutions to problems that had tormented them for weeks. Answers they had never considered suddenly flooding their minds. A business owner facing bankruptcy said he awoke with a strategy that saved his company, while a struggling student reported understanding a complex concept she had failed for months to grasp. Psychologists acknowledge that clarity can come after emotional release, but they concede the timing aligned too closely with these divine experience reports to ignore. Authorities monitoring the growing phenomenon have also received accounts of physical sensations accompanying the presence. Some describe a warm breeze moving through a closed room, despite no windows being open. Others reported their body feeling lighter, tension dissolving instantly, headaches leaving as quickly as they came. A few claimed they felt a gentle pressure on their shoulders, as if someone steadying them. It wasn't frightening, a witness stated. It felt protective. Across community centers, spiritual analysts believe these manifestations represent a significant turning point in the battle residents have been fighting at dawn. They assert that when affliction strikes aggressively, divine intervention responds profoundly. This is not just encouragement. One expert said, this is reinforcement. It's God entering the battlefield. Analysts say this aligns with patterns observed when individuals reach the end of their strength and cry out from genuine desperation. Several districts have begun reporting something even more dramatic. The silence that once accompanied early morning attacks has been replaced with an atmosphere of authority. Residents say the oppressive thoughts that used to overwhelm them now vanish the moment they awake. It's like the enemy fled before I opened my eyes. One man reported. The heaviness didn't even try to return. It's as if it knew it wasn't allowed here anymore. Officials observing behavioral shifts throughout the morning hours note that residents who once staggered through their routines now move with a steady calm. Productivity has continued to rise, but more importantly, hope appears to have taken root. People describe feeling supported, as though they are no longer walking into their day alone. One teacher said, "There's a confidence in me that I know I didn't create. It feels given." This growing wave of divine encounters has prompted leaders to issue a new public statement. Affliction may strike at dawn, but God arrives earlier. They insist that the city is experiencing a shift, not just in emotional resilience, but in spiritual territory. They warn that the battle is not over, but they celebrate the undeniable truth emerging from every district. Residents are no longer fighting darkness with their own strength alone. Heaven is now stepping into the dawn. As the first light breaks across rooftops this morning, one message echoes everywhere. From quiet homes to crowded streets, God has entered the morning. And once God steps into the dawn, no affliction has the power to hold the day hostage. In a stunning continuation of the spiritual developments witnessed across the city, residents who recently reported divine intervention entering their mornings are now experiencing what experts are calling the mighty exchange, a profound transfer in which fear, anxiety, and emotional burdens are being replaced with strength, stability, and supernatural peace. This exchange, first noticed just hours after widespread testimonies of God's presence, has rapidly become the defining feature of this unfolding dawn movement. Witnesses describe the transformation as instantaneous for some and gradual for others, but universally undeniable. A nurse who had struggled with overwhelming dread each morning said she felt a sudden urge, almost like a prompting, to release her fears in prayer. The moment I said, "God, take this," something shifted, she recounted. It was like handing over a weight I'd been carrying for years. Residents across multiple districts share similar experiences of burdens lifting the moment they chose to surrender them. Prayer centers throughout the region have become hubs of this phenomenon. Leaders report that individuals entering their doors with visible heaviness leave with unexpected brightness in their expressions. You can see the exchange happen in real time, one leader said. Their shoulders lift, their breathing steadies, and their eyes, once filled with panic, shine with peace. Analysts monitoring these gatherings say they have never seen emotional recovery occur at this scale and speed. Several residents claim they received strength in areas they had felt weakest. A widowed father overwhelmed by responsibilities said he felt a surge of confidence while packing his children's school bags. A young woman battling depression reported feeling mentally anchored for the first time in months. Mental health professionals reviewing these accounts acknowledge that such sudden reversals are highly unusual without external intervention. Something significant is occurring, one psychiatrist admitted. These are not typical patterns of emotional relief. Reports indicate that the exchange is not merely internal, but also environmental. Households once marked by tension now carry a noticeable calm. Couples who previously argued under morning stress say communication has softened. Even workplaces are reporting shifts. Employees who once trudged through the early hours now show unusual clarity and cooperation. A manager in the North Sector described his team as unexplainably unified. noting that the morning gloom that previously hovered over the office has vanished. Spiritual analysts believe this exchange is a direct response to both the holy fire ignited in Chapter 4 and the divine presence reported in Chapter 5. They explain that when God steps into a situation, he doesn't simply comfort, he transforms. This is not emotional coping. One analyst emphasized, this is divine replacement. God is not just taking burdens, he's giving strength in their place. They point to numerous testimonies where individuals didn't just feel lighter, they felt empowered. A particularly dramatic shift has been observed among those who were hardest hit by early morning affliction. A man who had battled crippling fear upon waking said, he felt those fears dissolve the moment he whispered a surrender prayer. He described the exchange as if someone reached into his chest and removed a knot of anxiety that had tightened for years. Moments later, he felt a strength he described as lion-like, a confidence that startled even himself. Local pastors confirmed that such instant empowerment cases have multiplied. Community officials monitoring behavior patterns now predict a large-scale transformation in morning routines across the city. They note that residents who once woke drained now begin their day with strategies, clarity, and renewed purpose. Productivity curves show a sharp incline. Even children preparing for school appear calmer and more focused, with teachers reporting noticeably improved attitudes during the first hour of class. Something is changing the city's mornings, a school administrator noted. And whatever it is, it's breaking cycles we couldn't break ourselves. Perhaps most striking is the emerging realization among residents that this exchange is not accidental. It is personal, intentional, deliberate. Many say they feel as though God himself is inviting them into the exchange, urging them to release their burdens in order to receive his strength. It's like he's saying, give me what weakens you, and I'll give you what lifts you, one witness shared. And every time I say yes, he does exactly that. As dawn settles over the city yet again, the atmosphere carries a message stronger than the morning sun. Where burdens once pressed down, strength now rises. Where fear once whispered defeat, peace now speaks victory. And the mighty exchange continues, turning weary hearts into unshakable warriors, one sunrise at a time. The city woke to a stunning new reality this morning as residents who experienced the mighty exchange began stepping out of their homes not as weakened individuals recovering from spiritual battle, but as empowered warriors carrying a boldness that witnesses describe as undeniably supernatural. Reports from multiple districts confirm a dramatic shift in morning behavior, with citizens moving through their routines with a confidence and authority rarely seen in previous weeks of affliction. One striking example came from the West District, where a woman who once trembled under the weight of morning anxiety was seen walking to work with a steadiness that shocked her neighbors. It was like watching someone transformed overnight. A witness stated, she wasn't just peaceful, she was powerful. Similar accounts have poured in, each describing residents who once entered the day drained now moving with a purpose that resembles military readiness. Prayer groups observing the transformation describe these individuals as dawn warriors, people who receive strength in the early hours and now walk with a fierce, unshakable resilience. Leaders report that during morning gatherings, participants no longer arrive seeking relief. They arrive declaring victory. The atmosphere has changed, one leader explained. They pray differently now. They speak with authority. They carry themselves as if something divine has settled inside them. In workplaces across the city, supervisors have noted dramatic improvements not only in productivity, but in demeanor. Employees who previously arrived quiet and withdrawn now speak with clarity and confidence. One office manager recalled a moment when a usually timid employee stood before the team and offered solutions with a voice filled with strength. It was like she found a version of herself she never knew existed, the manager said. Everyone felt the shift. Schools report similar observations. Children who once showed reluctance or fear in the mornings now seem energized and focused. Teachers claim the shift is so pronounced that morning lessons flow more smoothly than ever before. One teacher described entering her classroom and immediately sensing a peace and determination in the air, as if the kids had been touched by the same fire their parents experienced. Experts following the phenomenon believe this transformation marks the second stage of divine intervention described in earlier chapters, empowerment for battle. not just relief from oppression. They explain that one's burdens are exchanged for strength. People don't merely recover, they rise. Affliction tried to weaken them before their days started, one analyst said. But now, they're stepping into the day stronger than they've ever been. Residents have reported moments of boldness throughout the day, moments in which fear that once controlled them no longer holds any influence. A man who once struggled to speak up in meetings now leads conversations confidently. A mother who feared stepping outside her own home now walks her neighborhood praying with authority. One resident summed it up this way: "I feel like my voice came back. My courage came back. My fight came back." Community officials monitoring public morale say the transformation is not only spiritual but cultural. The collective emotional climate of the city has begun to shift from survival to strength. People aren't reacting anymore, a city council member stated. They're initiating. They're leading. They're standing tall. It's like something lifted the whole atmosphere. Perhaps the most dramatic change is the way residents now confront challenges. Instead of collapsing under pressure, they face difficulties head-on. Reports describe individuals handling conflicts with wisdom, walking through stress with calm, and responding to unexpected obstacles with a confidence that defies logic. A local council described it as a city stepping out of fear and into victory. As the dawn light spreads across rooftops once more, the scene is unmistakable. A city of warriors has risen. Those who once woke in weakness now walk in strength. Those who were afflicted now carry authority. And the morning that once threatened them has become the moment they conquer. The momentum of the previous chapter carried into a new dawn, one unlike any other. The atmosphere, once thick with invisible tension, now pulsed with a strange expectancy. It was as if heaven itself leaned closer, waiting to witness what would unfold next. The believer, still trembling from the spiritual clash of the night before, sensed something shifting, not subtly, not quietly, but forcefully, like the cracking of an old foundation. For months, no, years, affliction had tried to define their mornings. Every sunrise had been accompanied by the same internal whisper, "You won't make it today." But on this particular morning, that voice faltered. It didn't speak with its usual confidence. Instead, it sounded distant, weakened, like an enemy losing ground. It was the first undeniable sign that the spiritual atmosphere was changing. As the believer rose to their feet, the weight that clung to their chest felt lighter, almost fragile, as though one more breath of faith could shatter it entirely. The attacks hadn't fully stopped, but they had lost the authority they once held. What used to feel like chains now felt like threads. And threads can be broken. Still, spiritual forces press in one final time, knowing full well that breakthrough was near and desperate to thwart it. The internal battle escalated quickly. Accusations, fears, and old memories surged like a final wave of darkness. Not subtle anymore, but violent. As if the unseen enemy understood this was its last chance. Yet something different happened. Instead of collapsing under pressure, the believers stood firmer than they ever had. The prayer rising from their lips was no longer weak or wavering. It was sharp, steady, and unyielding. And then it happened. A moment, so piercing it felt like time paused. A single declaration, spoken not with emotion but with authority, cut to the storm. "This affliction will not own my mourning." The air shifted instantly. The heaviness that had lingered for so long recoiled, as though struck by a force it could not resist. It wasn't the volume of the prayer that carried power. It was truth. Truth always breaks lies. A warmth flooded the room, not physical but unmistakably real. It wrapped around the believer like a shield, filling every space where fear used to hide. Peace didn't just return, it conquered. The internal battleground transformed into a sanctuary. The storm didn't just calm, it bowed. And in that holy stillness, the believer understood this was not relief. This was victory. Suddenly, the clarity of God's presence illuminated everything. The weapons formed against them were exposed for what they truly were: cheap imitations, hollow threats, shadows pretending to be giants. Every sleepless night, every early morning dread, every internal attack, none of it had succeeded. They had survived what was meant to destroy them. More than survived, they had overcome. As the sun rose higher, its light gently spilled across the room, mirroring the breakthrough happening within. For the first time in a long time, the believer didn't brace themselves for the day. They embraced it. Affliction had tried to weaken them, but faith had strengthened them. Morning was no longer a battlefield. It had become a declaration. I begin my day in victory. The echoes of the spiritual struggle faded behind them, not forgotten, never forgotten, but now transformed into a testimony. The believer stepped forward, carrying not the weight of affliction, but the authority of someone who had seen God break chains in the darkest hours. Their morning was no longer defined by what attacked them, but by who sustained them. And as they walked into the new day, bold, steady, unafraid, one truth filled the air like a triumphant anthem. When affliction tries to weaken you, God strengthens you beyond what you ever imagined. The day had begun, and it began with power. The victory of the previous morning did not end when the sun rose. It followed the believer into the day like a mantle, heavy with glory, unmistakable in its authority. Yet with that victory came something new, something unexpected, an awakening, not the gentle kind that whispers, but the kind that shakes a sleeping warrior to their feet. After surviving the storm and breaking the chains, the believer was no longer just enduring. They were rising. The spiritual realm reacted swiftly. What had once pressed against them with suffocating weight now recoiled and regrouped, startled by the sudden shift in strength. For the first time, darkness could sense it. The believer was no longer prey. They were becoming a threat. A holy confidence stirred within, not rooted in pride, but in the unmistakable sense that heaven was backing every step they took. Even the atmosphere around them felt different. Ordinary sounds, traffic, footsteps, distant voices, seemed sharper, more vivid. It was as if their senses had awakened to something deeper, something spiritual. The world hadn't changed, but the believer had. They were finally seeing life through the eyes of someone God had strengthened, not someone affliction had weakened. As they walked through the day, faint remnants of old fears tried to creep back in. Shadows of past battles whispered at the edges of their mind. But the believer responded differently now. Instead of shrinking back, they confronted the shadows head-on, speaking truth with clarity and authority. The lies that once clung to them now dissolved like mist before fire. But awakening doesn't come without confrontation. Midday brought a sudden surge of pressure, an attack not physical, but undeniably real. A heaviness pressed against their thoughts, a flood of doubt and confusion rushing in, attempting to reclaim lost territory. But instead of collapsing, the believer stood still, steady, unshaken. The prayer rising from within them wasn't desperate. It was fierce. A warrior had indeed awakened. They whispered words of faith under their breath. Not loudly, not theatrically, but with quiet strength that shook the enemy more than shouting ever could. Every whispered word hit the pressure like a hammer, cracking the invisible weight until it finally shattered. The attack broke, not because the believer was strong on their own, but because they now understood the strength placed within them. That moment changed everything. The believer no longer saw themselves as someone barely surviving affliction. They saw themselves as someone positioned for purpose, someone meant to walk in spiritual authority, someone the darkness had feared for a long time, and with good reason. The warrior within them wasn't new. It had simply been buried beneath years of internal battles. Now it was awake, fully awake, and with that awakening came clarity. They began to understand why the attacks had always intensified in the early morning hours, why affliction always tried to weaken them before the day began. It wasn't random. It was strategic. The enemy had always feared who they would become once they realized their strength. And now that realization had come, it couldn't be undone. The believer's steps grew lighter, their spirit stronger with each passing hour. It wasn't pride, it was awareness. Awareness that they had endured fire and survived. Awareness that their morning battles had forged them into something unbreakable. An awareness that God was calling them to stand, not shrink back. This wasn't just another day. It was their first day truly awake. By sunset, the truth was undeniable. A warrior had risen from the ashes of morning affliction. Not the kind who fights with physical weapons, but the kind who conquers darkness with faith, persistence, and unshakable resolve. And as night approached, one thing was clear. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, the believer wasn't